Good day and welcome back. Today we will be doing bleeding. So why is it important to deal with bleeding? Well, you've probably dealt with bleeding in your home. Everyone cuts themselves at some point and then there's blood and everyone's screaming and everyone's yelling, no one knows what to do. So what happens is that bleeding is really defined as blood not being where it's supposed to be, whether that's inside the body, which is internal bleeding, or outside the body, external bleeding. Let's deal with internal bleeding because let's deal with external bleeding because it is easier to deal with. So you may have bleeding from your fingers because you cut your finger. You may have bleeding from your face because you're shaving and you cut your face badly with your shaver and now you have a little bit of a bleed, whatever the case is, or badly you in a car crash, or someone cuts their arm badly, or whatever the case is. So there are 4 ways to stop bleeding. So there's an acronym DIET. So the D stands for direct pressure. So it means that wherever you are bleeding, you are going to apply direct pressure. This involves you pushing your hand with a cloth or a towel onto the direct place where it's bleeding. So if you're bleeding on your forearm, you push on your forearm with a towel. What this does is it slows down the bleeding, and what that does in turn is it helps clotting, because the clotting only works if the blood slows. Then the next is the I, so indirect. So we have arteries, which are blood vessels in the body that supply blood to your limbs and organs and all that sort of thing, but that they're high pressure because they're coming straight out of the heart. So if you push on an artery and you hold down on the artery, so not directly on the injury, but indirectly on the artery, you then stop the blood getting to the site where it's bleeding, thus slowing the bleeding, thus helping stop the blood. So if you look at a diagram of where all of the major arteries are, it's generally in joints. So your elbow, there's an artery, or it's under your armpit, or it's behind your knee, or it's in your groin. So there's many places in the body where you can do indirect pressure, and what you do is you can push on that point, and then the blood will stop getting to the site that's bleeding. You've probably woken up at night and you've had your arm feeling like pins and needles, like a numb or a lum, whatever you want to call it, arm. We all know what we're talking about. Don't know what it's called. And so what's happened with your arm being like numb is that you've been lying on the artery and stopping the blood supply to that arm. In turn, it makes all the muscles weak. In turn, it makes all of the nerves get no blood supply, and that means that you can't feel it or move it, and that's exactly why you have that feeling. The next letter is E for elevate, because blood is weight and weight follows gravity. If we elevate the limb, so if I am cut on my finger and I elevate it, blood doesn't get to my finger. So D for direct, I for indirect, E, elevate, and then the T is tourniquet. So what is the purpose of a tourniquet? A tourniquet is only for massive hemorrhage, massive bleeding. If your arm gets cut off, if your leg gets cut off, if a major limb gets cut off, or there's bleeding that cannot be controlled, you apply a tourniquet. It's high or die. That might sound a bit strange. But if you put the tourniquet too low, it's not going to work. As well as what you also want to realize is that you cannot put a tourniquet on a joint. So not on an elbow or on a shoulder or on a knee, because there's too many bones. It's difficult for the tourniquet to apply pressure to the artery. Tourniquets are also better being very broad. If it's very thin, it's more likely to do more damage to the skin that it's on. So like if you were to use rope, it will do more damage to the skin and probably stop the blood, but damage the skin. Really good tourniquets are about 3 centimeters or an inch thick, and they are applied and the pressure is built up until the bleeding stops. The time you're going to use a tourniquet is when your direct and your indirect and the elevation of the limb doesn't work. So imagine my leg gets bitten off by a shark above the knee, and I try direct pressure, so I put a pad on the top of the knee, start working. I try indirect pressure, I put pressure in the patient's groin vessel, and that also doesn't stop the bleeding, and I can try and elevate it, but it's still just pumping out of this artery, because arteries are high pressure, remember? And then we apply a tourniquet. So it's important to realize that you can bleed out very fast. It can happen in minutes. If you have an artery that is cut and you are bleeding out of that artery, it can be 3 to 4 minutes and you have bled out your whole body's blood. So it's important to remember that if you cut an artery open and you do nothing about it, you can bleed out in minutes. Not hours, it's minutes. Your whole blood's volume can come out of your artery in about 4 to 5 minutes. So it is very important to stop that kind of bleeding. The number one rule of bleeding control is to stop the bleeding. Keep the red stuff inside, because if you don't have the red stuff inside, it's very difficult to replace. In theatre, the two things that surgeons struggle to deal with, or are two of the hardest things to maintain, is bleeding or enough blood in the vessels, and temperature. Because temperature is difficult to increase, and so is the blood volume difficult to increase. So if you can keep as much blood inside the body, the better, because blood is also heat. If I bleed, I lose heat. That is also another complication of bleeding. So in summary, when there is bleeding, you put direct pressure and elevate. If I can't elevate, I'm just going to keep on direct pressure. If direct pressure is not working, I can apply indirect pressure. If it is catastrophic bleeding, meaning it's massive bleeding, you can just apply a tourniquet straight away. A lot of people believe that if you apply a tourniquet, then they're going to lose the limb anyway, and so it's very dangerous, or whatever the case is. This is not true. A tourniquet can be applied and left on for hours, like it's 4 to 6 hours, and there is no complication to the limb lower. So if I put a tourniquet on my arm now, and I leave it there for 6 hours, and I take it off in 6 hours, it's not a biggie. So really, don't be too concerned about using tourniquets. I have gotten to scenes before where this man had cut his arm through his car door because he got out of his car and he didn't put the handbrake on, and he ran after his car, jumped into the door and pulled the handbrake up. In doing so, he ripped a big chunk out of his arm, and his friends had applied a tourniquet. I looked at the injury and I was like, I'm not sure about what's happening, and so I slowly released the tourniquet and there was no bleeding. So either the tourniquet stopped the bleeding, and when I took it off, the bleeding maintained and it didn't start again, or it was never necessary. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't really matter as long as we stop the bleeding. Hope this was helpful. Remember that there is a quiz at the bottom, and if you've enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.